Good morning. Ayin Beis, we're reviewing its conclusion, and we are on page 1389. We're in the middle of discussing Beriah, Yetzira, Asiya as Chaimer Tzura Tikkun. 3 stages of creation, the evolution from raw matter that has no shape at all, a general shape, and a specific shape. That he teaches Chaimer Tzura Tikkun. This itself is coming to explain the previous paragraph on page 1389 of Beriah Cheshech, Yetzira, Beriah Cheshech. How is connected to Yetzira, that's the level of Mishnah, and how Talmud is the level of Beriah. It's still in the state of Cheshech, relatively speaking. So even though Mishnah comes before Talmud, but Talmud is rooted, like we learned in the previous paragraph, in Chabad, so it doesn't come in full revelation. It's still in a darker state. But that is exactly what the Amoraim, the Talmudic sages do. They illuminate that darkness. But in the actual level, Talmud is the level of Beriah, and Mishnah is the level of Yetzira. So he's explaining that, what we learned from the Zohar, and from the Pri-Eitz Chaim and the Zohar, that Yetzir is masculine, Mashpia, and Beriah Cheshech is feminine. That's what we learned. And in the context of Gilui, Yetzira, the Beriah, being that it's locked and concealed, is Gerua, inferior to or lower level than the revelation of the world of Yetzira. And that's also what he says in Zohar, as we learned on top of the page, where he brought that Beriah is on the left side, Gevura, Helm, concealment. Yetzira is on the right side, Chesed, Gilui, and the middle is Asiya, which is Eisa Shalom. So the expression there in the pasuk is Yetzira, Beriah Cheshech, Eisa Shalom. That corresponds to Eisa. So Yetzira is Yetzira, Beriah Cheshech is Beriah, and Eisa Shalom is the level of Asiya that creates Shalom, that brings together the first two. Okay. So in that context, that's where he began to say, let's talk about Chaimer Tzura Tikkun, the 3 levels that are Beriah, Yetzira, Asiya. And as I just explained, there's like raw matter, then it gets a general shape, and then it gets a specific shape. That's what we learned. So the specific shape is that the Tzir Proti, where it really comes down into detail. I gave the example of whether it's development of a fetus, where in the beginning is just one cell, then it splits into 2, and then ultimately starts getting general shape and then a specific shape. So that's the 3 levels. And he brought the Sefer Yetzira that the Ramban explains. Bereshis Yotzer Meteu Mamish v'Asa Eina Yeshne. So Teu is Chaimer Yuli, is that unshaped raw matter. Meta Bnei Adam. You can't give it yet a name because it's something that's mysterious, doesn't yet have a description or shape. From Toyu he made Mamish. That's the second level, Yetzira, but it's still a general Metzias, and you can't yet give it now it's at least something that you can give it a name, and that's a level of Boihu, Toyu Boihu, that this is already starting to emerge, what you want, what the intention is in this creation of Beriah, but it's still in a state where you don't see the details. And when you say mamish, he says it doesn't mean mamish. Yes, mamish, it just means it's not complete ayin. He gives the example from Chochmah that the Paradis writes that Chochmah, even though it's called yesh, it just means it's not the ayin of Keser, but it's also not yet yesh's gomur. And then comes the 3rd level, which comes out all the details, and then you have the product, the entity is completely defined. That's the 3 levels. One more thing he said was Beriah was Efsharius HaMetzias, not Metzias Mamish. It means that it's the state that begins, like you say, a raw piece of matter. Now you have an entity which you can now shape into details. That's how the process works. So we'll continue learning from after the parentheses, which is 7 lines from the bottom of page 1389. And here's what he says. Now, why is the process work this way? Meaning, why is the highest level the one that is least shaped? Beriah is still not shaped into any details. Because as I said yesterday, and I repeat, God wanted to create it as much as possible in an organized process. So even though there are leaps and a quantum leap from Ayin to Yesh to create something, it's not just like taking a bottle of water and pouring it to cups, or taking one entity and just bringing it into another entity which has something commensurate, but still it's always in some progressive manner. So the first stage, when it goes from Atzilus to Beriah, though there's a leap, as he's going to explain, but it's still Kodev El Ayin. So the Yesh is there, but it's not yet a full-bodied Yesh. So let's go back to the fetus, the fetal development of an embryo. So what is the story? Why didn't God make it in a way that a father and mother conceive and the child is born immediately? Because he wanted to make it in a process that makes sense to us, that things develop, things grow. That's the way, that's a logical thing. Obviously, God could have made a different logic, but based on the logic as we see it, there's a process. You plant the seed in the ground. It doesn't just grow into a tree. It takes time, which makes total sense because it needs to develop. It needs to be cultivated. So the first step of the Yesh is going to be a lot more similar to the Ayin because it still retains that element of Pshittus, meaning shapelessness. It's not Ayin anymore. That's clear. But it's also not a full-blown Yesh, as in details, even general details, definitely not specific details. So it's an Ayin that's Kodev Ela, it's Yesh, Kodev Ela Ayin. If you go back, for example, at the bottom of page 1387, when he started saying, the Amshochi Yosher Elam HaBeriah, is the Gilui B'chinas Ayin Alakisha Be'elam HaBeriah. Being that Beriah is the Yesh HaRishon, he said it's still under the influence and the aura, you can say, of Malchus of Atzilus, because it's the first level that emerges from there. I mean, just to use a scientific example, when scientists try to understand the Big Bang, so we can't go back in time. So what they do is with telescopes and very powerful ones, they go back to look at what it looks like because it's light years away. So in a sense, they're getting a peek back in time to the point that they can see almost a split second after the Big Bang, even though according to them it happened so long ago. So my point is why? Because the closer you get to the moment when something began to develop, the more you'll understand how it works. So if you want to understand, for example, conception of a child, if you study the child, that's already a full-blown child. But if you go back to the moment of conception, like that moment where the egg was fertilized by a seed, you're getting a closer sense of how Ayin became a Yesh. So in a sense, in the world of Beriah, that's where you get. That's why it doesn't have shape. It's precisely because you're going back to that place where it's not yet defined and shaped. Like he said on that page, he said that's the Ayin of Kesed. So he's mentioning there, he's talking more about getting the revelation of that level when you probe through Talmud. Here he's saying like this, go back. Because the Tchilas is Savas Yesh, the beginning of the Yesh, so it's Kodev El Ayin. Like I just mentioned before, even though it's a leap, it's a quantum leap from Ayin to Yesh. It's not Yesh to Yesh. It's not taking one, like I said, it's not taking like a big piece of challah and cutting off a small piece of challah. They're very commended. That's Yesh mi Yesh. Here it's Ayin to Yesh. It's coming from a non-existent state, non-existent meaning on our terms what is existent, into an existent state. So even though it's Ein Arech, nevertheless, it's not completely beyond one another. Kiru v'shaychus al yesh. Because the ayin, and when you're talking about the first stages, it has a certain closeness and relationship to the yesh. So the yesh that's right there, the moment of when the ayin becomes a yesh, is in some ways under its influence and has more to reveal of the ayin than once it begins to become shaped in detail. And it makes sense, because that's the moment that the yesh emerged. Umishum zeh, and due to that fact, because the ayin, the yesh is karev el ayin, being that it's still under the effect and the aura of the source, the ayin that turned into, that created the yesh, it can't yet be a mitzias mamish. It's like the light of the sun as soon as it leaves the sun. So though it's already light, but it's very much under the influence, it's still so-called overwhelmed and overshadowed, if you can use that word, by the light of the sun. The farther the light moves from the sun, the more it becomes something manifest that we can see as daylight, as sunlight on earth. So the same thing here. Because it's so close to the ayin, so it can be a metzias mamish. Rak b'bchinas efsharius ha-metzias. And he goes now back to the original point. Only what we call it is that it's now capable of assuming the properties of an existent entity. So to say it's ayin, you can't say. To say it's a yesh mamish, you also can't say. That's why in the physical context, it's like something that's shapeless. Spiritually, it's something that's called Avsharius HaMetzias. We now have something that's capable of becoming a Metzias. And in Yetzira, it will start taking shape, and in Asiya, it will take full shape, as we learned. So we call it Avsharius HaMetzias. V'zeu ba'elam ha'Beriah. This is what happens in the world. That's the world of Beriah. Shemer shama ayin eliki. There, the ayin eliki, the divine, non-existential divine, radiates. That's why it's still it's in a formless and shapeless entity, what he calls Avsharius HaMetzias. So it's not a Metzias, but it's also not a non-Metzias. And as it distances itself from the ayin eliki, nasa b'chinas Metzias yeses. Then it becomes much more of a substantial entity. So there you have the context of the explanation of why Beriah is called Avsharius HaMetzias. In other words, potential Metzias. Whereas in Atzilus, you wouldn't say potential. You'd say it's not, it's an ayin. It's completely still a divine entity. So based on this, you could say, okay, there should be two levels. There should be Beriah and Yetzira. And the fact that it divides into three levels, remember, Chomer Tzura Tikun, Beriah, Yetzira, Asiya, Hu Mepnei Shekamoi Kain, Ba'koyach Va'ayin Aliki Yesh Gimel Madregas. Why does it break into three? Because also the divine ayin, the divine non-existential state, and the power of the divine, the koach, the divine faculty that creates yesh gimel madregas. There are three levels, so therefore those three levels will manifest in these three stages of development. And he's now going to spell out what these three are. So he's adding now another key point, that the oir itself, the koach and ayin aliki itself, the divine energy that creates, has three levels in it. What are the three levels? Ki kol koach mitchilas aviyosei at seif giluav, he says, from every koach, every faculty, every power, every force, from when it originates, from when it's first conceived, till the end of the process, yesh be'gimel madregas, has three levels. Echad, level number one. We're turning the page in a second, page 13, we're going to 1390. Echad kamoishahu be'etzem v'le b'chinas Gilui adayin. So the first stage is the way it is at its core, that something is now beginning, the transmission is beginning, but it's not yet revealed. Something has stirred. Something was conceived, but it was not yet revealed, not in a state of Gilui yet. Ayin Beis, stage number 2, commission is Gala, it's already revealed. Ach, hu b'chinas Gilui kloli adayin. But it's still a general Gilui. I'll give some examples in a moment. Gimel, and the third stage, commission b'chinas Gilui prati, as it comes down into a detailed revelation. So a simple example, you're writing a business plan. So the first thing is you have to write down just the headline, the main point, executive summary, if you wish. Then you write an outline, like a table of contents, an outline. So it's a Gilui, but it's not a Gilui in details. And then you flesh it out into details. The same thing, you build a building. The first thing is you have to first say, okay, we begin the process. The next is you have a general outline, like a skeleton. You see a building going up, you see the beams, you see the floors, but you don't yet see details. And then comes the final step where the details are all filled in. And the same is true in a speech, in a book. Everything you do in life goes through these stages. Here he's talking about the ayin and koach halaki, but it evolves into everything we do. If you do something in an organized way, it's going to begin, like he says, etzem, the first step, but it's not yet revealed. Think of machshava, a thought. Then dibur begins to generally spell it out, and maisa breaks it down into all the details. It's not an exact example, but the point is that everything goes through these 3 stages. He says now, we're on the top of page 1390. Like, for example, the midas hachesed. He's going to give the example of the attribute, the midah, the emotion of kindness, of love and kindness, loving kindness. Step number 1, it's still a potential state. It's a koach hachesed. Just like we say koach hariyah, you have the power to see. You're not necessarily seeing yet, but you have the power to see. When you're asleep or when your eyes are closed, you still have the power to see, but it's a koach yuli. She'en b'chinas gilui klal. There's no gilui, it's just the power that God blessed us in our nefesh. Everyone has chesed in them. There's a chesed in the nefesh. Just like there's seichel in your brain. We're not talking about whether you're using it or not, or whether you're revealing it or not, or expressing it or not. But it exists. So what you have now is like a reservoir of power that from that will emerge all the Giluim. So even though you may not be doing chesed yet and all in any way, but you have the power of chesed. Talked before about a fetus. As a child develops, also its faculties develop. It may not be, it's not using the faculties yet. They're not revealed yet. But there's an existent entity called koach chesed, or he calls it the koach yuli of chesed. That's step 1. Ayin Beis, Gilui kloli. So now chesed is now emerging and becoming a Gilui kloli. It's being revealed, but it's still in general terms. The person has now been stimulated, aroused to do chesed. You're feeling chesed now. I feel I'm in the mood. I want to be kind to someone. I'm feeling kindness. But that's just a general feeling. You don't yet have defined, and it's not yet discernible. How are you going to bestow that kindness? So you have an idea, like, a person wakes up and they feel, today, I really want to be compassionate. I want to be kind. Whatever the reason is, a reason, no reason. It doesn't mean yet you have where you're going to do that. It may express itself in many different ways. That's the second step. The first step, you don't even have that. The first step, it's all in the potential that you have the faculty of chesed. Now you're already emerged, but it's bechlolus. Gimel, now how chesed is coming down in a specific way. In what manner will be this kindness that you bestow? Lifi Eifana Makabel, and it's commensurate measured to the so-called to the parameters of the Makabel, the recipient. She is Kabel Etzle. So it's not just that you have chesed and you want to give chesed. You know already what specific chesed is, to whom, and in what measure you're going to, in a way that he could receive it. Step number 2, without the detail, you can start giving chesed and maybe overwhelming because it's not yet defined. But now in the stage 3, it's coming defined and very specifically flowing exactly to the where it's supposed to belong in the way that the recipient can receive it. That's the example. Now he goes back to the moral, to the nimshal. V'cheinu b'chol oir, and so too is it with every form of energy or light or transmission. So yesh by gimel madreges elu, has these 3 levels. Hainu k'moshe nimshach min ha'etzem, how it's nimshach from the core. Step number 1, u b'bchinas atzmi adayin. And that's still a core-like level because it's not yet expressed in any way. Sheina b'chinas Gilui, because it's not in any form of revelation or expression. U'kamoshe b'chinas Gilui. Step 2, stage 2, or step 2 is how it becomes revealed. Aval eina mugbal, but it's not defined yet, or it's not defined. Ve'eina mischalek lepratim adayin, and it's not broken down to details yet. Number 3, how it comes down into defined parameters, pratim, and a breakdown of details. And these are the 3 levels of Chaymer Tzura Tikkun, Beriah, Yetzira, Asiyah. So as I said, in my Morim talks about it, but here's one of the places where it really elaborates relatively on what is the difference between Beriah and Yetzira Asiyah. Based on this, I've given many classes where I speak about how Tzilas, Beriah, Yetzira Asiyah is like the 4 steps that are required in any type of production. You start with a vision. You first make a general, then you create a general outline. Then you flesh out the general details. But then comes down the final details in Asiyah, the breakdown. Like here, like he spoke about, Shari Samitzias or Chaymer, raw matter, like the Koach here, and then it comes down into a general definition or general description, and then into breakdown of details. Ubederech Klal, as the Rebbe Rashab gives another 3 levels, that 3 names that we have learned earlier in Ayin Beis, Ubchinas Etzem v'Teir u'Pu'ula. So you may recall, or if you don't recall, I'll remind you, he spoke about Shemus when you have names. So in Hebrew, there's a thing called Shema Etzem. There's a Shema Toyar, a Shema Pu'ula. There's more Shemas. There's Shema Kinui, Shema Mushal. But these 3, what's the difference? Shema Etzem is the name of something. Like, for example, you'll say that someone's name is Reuven. Shema Etzem, that's the Etzem of who this person is. But it doesn't tell you anything about him. Toyar is a description. Reuven HaChochem, for example, the wise Reuven, or Reuven HaChesed, a Baal Chesed, or any type of description. Toyar is a description. But a Toyar is generally a general description. It doesn't tell you details. Pu'ula, Shema Pu'ula is his actions, his functions, which already comes down into specific. So you could have somebody who's, let's say, a name of somebody. Then you could say he's an architect, he's a scientist. But you don't have any details. Then Pu'ula is the action. When he brings it into an action, then it comes down to a very specific manifestation, a specific he's executing. So Shema, so the same is true with everything. You say a shulchan is a table. That's a Shema Etzem. A Shema Toyar is a shulchan is a place where you eat on the table, or you learn Torah at the table. And Pu'ula is the actual action that you're doing, a specific thing, not just a description of the entity, but an actual. So he says these correspond to the 3 levels that we're talking about, which can be elaborated upon plenty, but he just says it here in a parenthesis. Now he's going to, and this is all coming to explain why there's 3 levels in 3 worlds, not 2. He says, And because the source, which is the Oir and Ayin Eliki, the non-existence, the divine energy and the Ayin being a non-existent state compared to the existence of the Yesh, Begimel Madreges, since that manifests in 3 stages, Al Kain, that's why that's why the creation process is also consists of 3 stages. And what are they? Beriah, Yetzira, V'Asiya. So Beriah, Yetzira, V'Asiya is the product of the producer. The producer has 3 stages in how he produces. The 3 levels of Oir, as we just described, Etzem, Gilui, Kloli, and Gilui Prati, or Chem Mitzura Tikkun, or like he said, Etzem, Toyer, Pu'ula. So too, the product also has 3 stages. And this is the 2 levels. Yetzir Oir is Yetzira, Oir, light. U'Beriah Cheshach, Beriah Cheshach. Shabriah b'chinas Cheshach v'Helam. Beriah is the first state of darkness and Helam. Why? Because it's close to the Ayin, where it's coming from, so it's still not shaped. She b'chinas Stimus Adayin. It's still in a closed state. It's still locked up because it's still under the influence of something that is beyond structure, beyond Mitzias. Shein b'chinas Gilui. It's not in a state of Gilui. The Yetzira is stage 2, b'chinas Eir v'Gilui. And interesting, he doesn't bring now Eisha Shalom, the next part of the verse, which refers to Asiya, like the Zohar said. Eisha Shalom Oisa. So Yetzir is Yetzira, Yetzir Eir. Beriah Cheshach is Beriah, and Eisha Shalom is Asiya. That would be the 3rd step. He doesn't bring it because primarily the goal here is talking about Mishnah and Talmud, or Talmud and Mishnah, which correspond to Beriah and Yetzira. He's not really talking about Asiya. Even though he did bring it from the Zohar, but the real focus here is the comparison of the Cheshach and Helam of Beriah and the Gilui of Yetzira, as we began talking about earlier when we were talking about the difference between Mishnah and Talmud. Okay. So I'll stop here for questions, and then we'll continue. Really beautiful here is the confluence, how it corresponds so well that since there's 3 levels in Oir, therefore there's 3 levels in the Isavus, in the creation. It doesn't say Kalim, but the same idea. You have the 3 levels that correspond, 3 stages of development in general. Okay. So let's just continue. V'hine. Now, even though the b'chinas hastimus v'halam de Beriah ulamayla b'madreg b'chinas hagilui Yetzira, so Beriah we know comes before Yetzira. First comes the Chomer, like he said, the Chomer Hiyuli, the potential state, what he calls Afshariyas HaMetzias. It's not yet a full Yesh, a full-blown Yesh, but it's also not complete Ayin. It's like an in-between, because of the progression and the way it was made, which should be in a stages of progressive state, even though there's the leap, but it's still under the influence of the Ayin, like we learned in the bottom of last page. So this level of stimus and helam, the stimus, that it's locked up or closed, this closed and concealed state of Beriah is higher than the Gilui of Yetzira. Nevertheless, there's a quality that Yetzira has over Beriah. Remember the language in Pri Eitz Chaim? We said the language was Beriah liyeshes stuma nikra cheshav hi gerua mina Yetzira hamagula hanikra eir. Gerua means it's lower than, it has something that's lacking. You could say the word inferior, but I don't want to use that word, as I said, on these levels. She says there's something Yetzira that has a quality that over Beriah. What is that? Mashahu b'chinas hagili, that exact point, that it's revealed. Shezeo ma'ila gedela, that's a great quality. Mipnei shetachlis hachavanu b'chinas hagili, because the ultimate purpose, and he means ultimate purpose in all levels of creation, of existence, in every way, is that should be Gilui. It's like saying to someone says, I have the potential. That's nice. But if you don't actualize the potential, you're not fulfilled the purpose. There was a chassid that once the Alter Rebbe said to him, you have such a good mind. If you really applied yourself, you really could be a big lamb. And he said, Rebbe, I have the potential. I have the koach. So the Rebbe answered him, the Alter Rebbe said, just like a ganef, a thief is not someone who could steal, but someone who does steal. A lamdan is not someone who could learn, but someone that does learn. That's an interesting example that he gives from a ganef, which can be discussed why he's giving that a negative example, but it just drives the point home. So to have the koach of something is amazing. Without that, you can't actualize anything. Like we said, it has to begin with the koach. But the kavana, tachas hakavana, shouldn't just remain in a dormant or in a latent state, but it should be revealed. That's the tachas hakavana. So though Beriah is higher and is the first stage of development, but it's like the fetus. When a new child is conceived, the egg is fertilized by the seed, and now you have one cell, yes, everything will come from that. But that's not the kavanah. The kavanah is that it should develop for over 9 months, and then it should be the child should be born. Later is Gilui. Ibur, pregnancy, develops the child, but the kavanah is that should be the birth of a child. That's why we don't celebrate the birthday upon moment of conception. You celebrate the birthday upon moment of arrival, meaning emerging into this world as a separate entity from the mother. And the same thing in everything in life. There's no Gilui without a Helam before it, but the kavanah is the Gilui. So in that sense, Yetzira has something that Beriah does not have, because it brings it out in a revealed way. Even though you could say everything in the Yetzira came from Beriah, because it was all there, like we mentioned before, the Chemer Hiyuli, the piece of raw clay, has everything in it, but it's not yet a keli. You can't use it. It's like a raw piece of gold. It's not yet. You want to make it into a mishkan, into an aron, to a holy ark. You have to shape the gold into an ark. And the same thing with with any other entity. For it to be functional, for it to fulfill its purpose, it's not just enough to have it in raw form. So that's the Gilui. Now he's going to elaborate more on this mila of Gilui. And as I said yesterday, and I want to go back to it, this is not incidental. This is very relevant, because remember the kavanah of Torah Oyer, which is the whole theme in this section, the interface Mamayla Lamata is Oyer, Gilui. Not enough that just remain Behelim. So even though, like going back to Talmud Bavli, compared to Mishnah, the Maila of the Tanoim, even though the Talmud does reach and probe and go deeper into the source, but with the Maila of the Tanoim is Gilui. It's like the Gilui of Matan Torah. You'll say, one second, Golus, where God is concealed, Hester upon him, can reach far deeper than Giluim. So what's the Maila of a Gilui? Matan Torah, because a Gilui is ultimately the revelation of the divine. Now, as I said, you want the best of both. You want the etzem to come out the Gilui, but Gilui is necessary, and that's why, indeed, in the stages of development, you had was, well, I don't want to use development because it's not a good example here, but in the stages, first there was the highest Giluim by Matan Torah, from Moshe Rabbeinu, Ish Mipi Ish, all the way to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and the Talmudic, and the sages, the Mishnah sages, the Mishnaic sages. Then comes the next stage where you bring that light even into a state of darkness, which accesses Beriah, which accesses the Ayin Eliki. Like he said before, the Yesh of Beriah accesses is closer to the Ayin Eliki of Keser. However, the goal is Gilui, ultimately to be revealed. And that's what he's emphasizing here, the Mila of Gilui. And that's what he's going to explain now in the next section. Further explain what is Gilui. Then he's going to go for a few pages. Then he's going to speak about it in Avodah. And that's where, but as I said, I'll try to move this very quickly because I don't want to get too bogged down into any specific details, because really more the bigger picture that we want to draw out from this. But before I continue, again, I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to emphasize this point of Giluyim, He's going to give an example, because here's the question: if Beriah is higher than Yetzira, and Yetzira has the mile of Gilui, so how does this work exactly? When you say higher, which one really is higher? Based on this, the Tachas HaKavon is Gilui. So he's going to explain this with an example of Iggulim and Yosher, something we learned already earlier, but it's very relevant, as we'll see. Iggulim and Yosher is another name for Makif and Pnimi, or Maseviv and Mamala. So he says, Yesh lahoyer me'inyan Iggulim v'Yosher. So Iggulim v'Yosher literally means circles, and Yosher is a line, a straight line. Circles and line. In mathematics, you have a circle, you have a straight line. So in Kabbalah, Iggulim v'Yosher is what Chassidus calls Seviv Kalam and Mamala Kalam. Iggulim is like an eagle, a circle, like a Seviv, that does not penetrate internally. It remains more transcendent, surrounds. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, it doesn't mean surrounds physically, it means it's beyond and above the structure. And Yosher, like a line, like the Kav, is an actual line that goes from top to bottom, and it carries the flow of energy in a pnimistic way. So again, another name for Iggulim v'Yosher is Makif and Pnimi, or Seviv and Mamala. Just, they're really synonymous. So he says like this: the Iggulim l'mayla b'chinas hayesher. Iggulim, we know, is a higher level than Yosher, because it's still in a level that's all encompassing. Yosher is already a level that enters and is tailored to each specific item. In the beginning of Ayin Beis, a long arichas about the difference between keser or rotzen and the koach pnimim and the eres pnimim and the 10 spheres. So Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvur, Teferes, these are all specific faculties or attributes, each one in a keli, like the power of sight in your eye, the seichel in your brain, the emotions in your heart. That's Pnimi, that's Yosher. Makif would be Rotzen, your desire, your will. Will doesn't have a locality. It's the will for anything. It could be the will to see, the will to speak, the will to think, the will to feel. So will is a higher level. Iggulim is higher than Yosher. U'makol mokim, nevertheless, it says in Kabbalah that Iggulim is bechinas nefesh. In the levels of the neshama, Nefesh Ruach, neshama, chai yechida, it says that the Iggulim is the level of nefesh. The Yosher is the second level, bechinas ruach. So how does that happen? You just said Iggulim is higher than Yosher, so it seemed to make more sense. Iggulim is ruach, and Yosher is nefesh, but it says the opposite. And he's going to explain for this, the similar to what we're learning here. Beriah, like Iggulim, is higher than Yetzira, but in the element of Gilui, Yetzira has a quality that's higher, and that's the same thing with Yosher, even though it's lower than Iggulim, but it has the mile of Gilui, because it's revealed in a specific way, in a pnimistic and internalized way. Dine be'etz chayim shara nekudim, Perek Zayin, quoting from an Eitz Chaim. I wrote on the side here that it apparently means should be Perek Aleph. I looked it up. He writes like this: Kosav, the Shem Mad the Tikkun Shu B'chinas Yosher Hu B'Zah. Shem Mad Tikkun, which is the level of Yosher Pnimi, like we're saying, is in Zah. Ubi Yetzira, manifests in Zah and Yetzira. Shehu B'chinas Ruach. That's the level of Ruach, like we just said. Yosher is Ruach. B'zeh Ruach Shel HaNekudim. I'm not going to go now into the details what that means. As I said, I'm staying away from the details. That I rely on what I taught the first time we learned this. That's the level, Ruach. I'm going to skip the parentheses because, again, it'll take us into a whole other subject matter, which does explain what he says here. But if you want more details, as I said, go back to the recordings that of the previous time I learned this section. I just want to see how far the parentheses goes. So Harimavur, skipping the parentheses, Harimavur, the Yetzira, b'chinas ruach v'yesher. So basically, Eitz Chaim clearly says that Yetzira, which is lower than Beriah, is the level of ruach and yesher. meaning the Gilui level. And based on that, the Rebbe Rashab is saying that Beriah, though it's a higher level like Iggulim, is the level of Nefesh and Iggulim. So here clearly you see where everything twists around because of the Mila of Gilui. So it's like, it's not exactly, but it's similar to the idea when we say Seif Maisa b'machshava tchila. That the kavana, the highest levels, the kavana is the end process. The kavana is there should be a Gilui. So the Gilui really has something that goes all the way back to the root. Whereas when it's still concealed, technically it's a higher level because you can't have the Gilui before you have the Helam. You can't have a newborn child without having the conception and the development of the fetus that's still concealed. But Poel Mamish, Yosher has the quality that connects to what he says here, to Ruach, which is higher than Nefesh of Iggulim. Okay. Again, stop if anybody wants to ask anything, because he's going to continue with more examples to make this case. It's all making a case for the Mila of Yetzira over Beriah, the Mila of Gilui over Helam. Even though the Helam Stimus is a higher level, but it's still in a state that's concealed.
Rabbi, is it sort of the difference between the potential, like you talk about more abstract will and it's more abstruse, and the actuality? I mean, I guess that's what it is. It's obviously that, but
yes, you could say that because he does say it's the potential. Remember, you can't have actual without potential, obviously, but actual has something that potential simply will not have. I gave the story with the Alter Rebbe, not how much you could do, it's what you do that defines you. Like someone will say, I'm a great person because I could be great. So be great. So in other words, that's the point. That Gilui is not just a technicality that which is there is being revealed. It is the ultimate purpose. So it has a tremendous power to it. Yeah, that's
perfect.
In simple terms, yes, potential is the source of the actual, but the actual is in some ways higher than the potential.
Mm-hmm. And that's why here the whole purpose of creation is to be here to make this world a dira protectum. Is that right?
Right, in a revealed way, not just to say, like when you say, I'm a good Jew at heart, or I'm a good person at heart, that's nice, but then, act on it. I'm even thinking that I'm going to skip the next section because it's very dense, and I remember learning it in depth and over a few classes last time. I think it's just going to be more confusing than helpful, to be honest. Not God forbid the Rebbe Rashab. I mean, for me to start explaining it, it's going to take us. I'm just looking at it now. I'll just briefly sum it up. If you want to read it more in depth, feel free to do so by all means. And if you want an explanation, go back to the classes I gave back in the first time we learned it. What he says in the next section, he's giving another manifestation of this in the difference between. Let me see briefly. The Tagin and the Oisius. Actually, it's negated to this week's parsha. There are 4 levels in Hebrew letters. There are 4 levels. We learned them earlier. There's the Oisius themselves, the letter Aleph, Beis. That's the Os. There's Nukudis. That's the pronunciation, punctuation. Is it Aleph, Kometz Aleph, O, Patach Aleph, A? How do you pronounce it? That's Nukud. That's like the punctuation marks. That how you pronounce it. The third thing is Tagin. Tagin are the crowns. If you look in a Sefer Torah or in a mezuzah or tefillin, you'll see letters have very thin little lines on top. Many yuds, a crown. So it's more of a something that's more sublime because it doesn't really change the letter or the pronunciation of the letter, but it's still part of the letter. And then there's timim. Taimim is the nigun, the trop. Like how you read it, like Bereishis bara Elokim is the trop as they read in the Kriya Satira. So it's called a taime. Taimim also means, besides taimim means the sound or the song, it also means the reasons, the deeper reasons. So Tansa is the acronym. Taimim Nekudis Tagin Asius. Connection to this week's parshas, you'll see when it says Bikurim, when they brought the first fruit offering, it says V'samta betena. You shall place it in a basket. It says the Baal Shem Tov that tena, tes nun aleph, the interesting word, is made up of 3 of the 4 that I just said. Taimim nekudis esis. It doesn't mention tagin, and he explains why, because that's keser. That's a taimim nekud esis. Point being is that in the letters of the Torah, tagin is more of a makif, because it's a crown. It's not the very letter itself. Esis is the letter. First, if you only had the crowns, you wouldn't understand anything. It wouldn't manifest in any form of letters. I'm thinking maybe one of the reasons he's bringing it because it's connected to before Sefer Sipur, everything in the Torah is written down like in a Sefer, so maybe that's connected to that. But regardless, he says the following, and I'm going to just tell it to you verbally instead of reading it all inside. He says in Eitz Chaim, it says that the Tagin and the Eisius is what creates Biyah, Beriah, Yetzira, Asiyah. And he says that Tagin come from Bina and the Eisius from Zah and Malchus. Now Bina manifests where? In Beriah. So we see from this that since Tagin is Bina, and Bina manifests in Beriah, so the Tagin, the Keser, the Iggulim, manifest in Beriah. And at the same time, it also says that Tagin is the level of Nefesh. So exactly what we learned earlier, that Iggulim, even though they're higher than Yosher, but they're the level of Nefesh. Like he says, I'll just quote one line. He says, Tagin she'lamayla ma'esis, Tagin which are higher than the letters, both in stature and also physically. They're the crown on top of the letters. That's the Eira she'emdim lamayla ma'esis. Those are the energies, the energy that is beyond, above the letters. Eiris makifim. And that's the level of nefesh. So here you see the same idea, that even though Tagin on one hand is like the Kesarim, like the crowns, the Makifim, the Iggulim, still the level of Nefesh. Oisius, which is the level of Gilui, of Yosher, that's the level of Ruach, the level of Yetzira. That's what he added here. As I said again, if you want to read it inside, feel free to do so. And you can follow the classes I gave on this. But I'll continue reading after the parentheses. He says, "V'hinein isbar le'il, the bria nikretayu v'yitzira voyu." I think I'm going to stop here actually, because he's going to go now further into toyu and voyu, which we learned earlier is bria and yitzira. Toyu is when it's still a chemer poshet, a shapeless entity, and yitzira is where it begins to take shape, but voyu, but it's not yet the specific shape details until asiyah. So he's going to continue in discussing that. And again, all of this is to come to demonstrate and establish how Yetzira Gilui has a mila over Beriah, the Helam of Beriah. While we also said that, of course, Beriah has the mila because it reaches deeper Talmud than Mishnah. We'll get back to the Talmud Mishnah comparison as we move along here. I don't think the Rebbe Rashab actually does get back to it. Maybe he does, I don't remember now. But we'll learn it all and we'll understand it hopefully much better. Let's stop here. Any questions?
This might be not a very intelligent question, but the Iggulim and the Kavim, if one of them is Memale Kol Almin and one of them is Sevev Kol Almin, so from what I know, the feminine is the Iggulim and the Kavim is the masculine. Is that correct?
It says that in some places. That's correct. However, here it appears the other way around, because earlier he said, if you remember, that Yetzira is feminine, Yetzira is masculine, and Beriah is feminine. Koach is nukva, because he's talking there about, like I said, the masculine is more expressive energy, and which would be like Yetzira, it's expressing its it's Gilui, and feminine would be more the internal, intimate energy that relates to Beriah. So even though in some places it does say Iggulim is feminine and Yosher is masculine, oh, 1 second, is that what I said? No, the opposite.
Yeah, that is what it.
Oh, is that what
Iggulim
you
is
said? So
feminine.
it's the same thing. So it's saying the same thing?
No, it's not, because Iggulim is, if it's feminine, then it should, because feminine is internal.
No. So here, Iggulim feminine. Yeah, it does say. What's saying feminine? Koach. Yeah, Beriah, which is Iggulim, associates with feminine, and Yosher, which is Pnimi, and Yetzira relates to masculine. Is that what you said?
So you're saying that in different places, so Pnimi is usually feminine, Koach is feminine because it's inside, the womb is dark, and
That's
it's
not what I
internal.
said. No, it's the opposite. I said the opposite.
No, you said Koach is feminine, or the way it expresses itself in Yetzira is
Right.
masculine.
That's what he said at the bottom of page 1388. Correct. So that would make Yetzira Yosher masculine and Beriah Koach feminine.
And yet
Iggulim.
the igul, which is a makif, is not internalized. It's interesting
Right.
that's the masculine.
No, that's the feminine. According to
Isn't
what he says here.
Right. It's interesting that that's the feminine, because the feminine is usually pnimi, right?
Yeah, but he's not. It's not what he's saying. It's not. That's a different places. Not here. Here he's talking about it in this context. Well, if you want to bring masculine and feminine into it, right now he didn't mention masculine and feminine. If you want to bring it, you have to go back to the bottom of page 1388. That's what he said. He said Koach and Beriah is feminine, and the Oyer and Yetzira is masculine. He brought it from the Pri Etz Chaim. That's what he said.
But Beriah is more pnimi than Yetzira, so it does align. Elishav, I'm not sure how you started.
No, Beriah is not pnimi. Beriah is, according to this Iggulim, maki.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I would stay away from these comparisons because it just gets complicated. And bottom line is what he says here. It says clearly at the bottom of page 1388, he says it explicitly. Koach Yetzira is Tchura. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oyer is Tchura. Yetzira is masculine. Koach and Beriah is Nukva. And actually Beriah, which is higher than Yetzira, would be feminine, which is higher than the masculine of Yetzira. But in Ma'ila of Gilui and Yosher, Yetzira has the quality that he's talking about here. Yeah.
I mean, I guess everything is made up of everything.
That's correct. That's why you have to distinguish in each mimer according to what he's discussing. In each mimer, everyone has the focus in that mimer, what he's talking about here.
Right.
Okay.
Different dominance of that aspect.
Right. Hey, Phil, did you have a question? Because I have a question, but I don't want to jump ahead of you. Oh, I guess he didn't have a question. Okay, so my question, actually, this relates to this, I think, in some way, the struggle you were having before about the distinction between Beriah being Koach and it's a higher world, but yet there's less Gilui. So it's everything we're talking about now, but your effort to struggle how it's more pnimi. My question is, given he's made such a strong case for Gilui and Yetzira here, Bashva in comparison to Beriah, he's made such a strong argument for the issue of expression and tachlis, that it's now got me wondering, where's the hamshacha from Beriah into Yetzira? Like it's almost like Yetzira is coming before Beriah in a sense, and Mishnah does come before Talmud. So now I'm trying to understand, what does Yetzira draw from Beriah in the Seder Ishtalshalus? You see, my question: if Talmud is a derivation of
that's why I said the Talmud Mishnah connection I wouldn't discuss right now.
Uh-huh.
He's not talking about it right. He didn't get back to that. Either he'll get back to it, or we will have to do that.
Uh-huh.
So right now, I would not try to jump to Talmud and Mishnah. Right now, simply put, Beriah is the root, because the potential is the root of the actual.
I see.
And the raw matter is the root, like I said, the example of the fetus. You can't have a full-blown revealed child without first having the one cell. You can't have a tree without a seed. So Beriah right now is the concealed state where it's still in a potential and not yet actualized as in details. And Yetzira actualizes. How that applies to Mishnah and Talmud, I'd wait to see.
Okay.
Finish the whole topic before we get back to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, because it's understandable that Talmud comes from Mishnah, not the other way around. So how is that consistent with what he's saying here? That is clear. That needs to be explained. We'll see. I don't think he's talking about that here. I think here he wants to just talk about the mile of the Giluim of the time of the Tanoim in the Mishnah over the mile of the Helam of Talmud, not to apply that idea that Talmud is the root of Mishnah, obviously.
Right.
That's going to become clear. But we'll see where he goes with this. I'd wait.
Okay.
Okay. So let me stop the recording here. We are on page 1390, right?